My name is Eleanor, I'm 68 years old, and my own son gave me a choice: become his wife's full-time maid, or get thrown out onto the street. Before I tell you how my 5-word reply to his desperate, begging phone call left him utterly speechless, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started, as so many terrible things do, over breakfast. The smell of coffee was still hanging in the air, a comforting aroma that was about to be spoiled forever. My name is Eleanor, I'm 68. Since my dear husband Richard passed from a heart attack 2 years ago, my world has felt smaller. He was my rock, my everything, and without him, the silence in our beautiful Cleveland home became a weight I couldn't bear. That's when my son Mark stepped in. But we'll get to that. This particular morning, I was placing a plate of freshly made toast on the polished oak table of my son's home in Ohio. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt peaceful. It was a lie. The contractor's coming on Thursday, Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, announced. She said it as casually as if she were commenting on the weather, her eyes fixed on her perfectly manicured nails. I froze. The plate trembled slightly in my hands. A piece of toast slid precariously close to the edge. I set it down carefully, my heart starting a low, nervous drumbeat against my ribs. Across the table, Mark never looked up from his phone. The blue light of the screen reflected in his glasses, creating a barrier between us. He was there, but he wasn't. He hadn't been for a long time. I waited for an explanation. For him to look up and say, "Oh, Mom, let me tell you about our exciting new plan." For anything. The silence stretched, filled only by the aggressive tapping of Tiffany's nails on her phone case. "The contractor?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. Tiffany sighed. A little puff of air that conveyed a world of impatience. She finally graced me with her attention, a bright artificial smile plastered on her face. "Yes, Eleanor. To modernize the upstairs. It's so dated. We're thinking of a more open concept, minimalist feel." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My eyes must have been screaming the question, because her smile tightened. "Your room," she clarified, her tone sharp as broken glass. "And Mark's home office. We're thinking of knocking down that wall between them. Maybe putting in some glass panels. It will be fabulous." My gaze shot to my son. He flinched, glancing at me for a fraction of a second before his eyes darted back to the safety of his screen. He couldn't even look at me. It felt like a punch to the gut. That's my room," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "The room where I slept. The room where I kept the last remaining photos of Richard. The room that held the little box with his old watch and his reading glasses. My sanctuary." Mark cleared his throat. "We haven't decided anything for sure, Mom. We're just exploring options." His words were weak, empty. A pathetic attempt to soften a blow that had already landed. Tiffany, however, had no time for such weakness. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, it's decided. And we have the perfect solution for you." Her eyes glittered with something that looked like triumph. "You can move downstairs. The basement is completely unused. We'll throw down a few rugs, maybe a lamp. It could be quite cozy." The basement. My blood ran cold. I'd been down there exactly once to store my winter coats. It was a damp, windowless concrete box that smelled of mildew and earth. It was cold even in the height of summer. A place for forgotten things. And now for me. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I was drowning, and my own son was watching me go under. Tiffany seemed to relish my silent horror. "Of course," she continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "If that doesn't appeal to you, we understand. You're always free to, well, to find other arrangements. It's your decision, really." She smiled then, a cold, calculated expression that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned forward as if sharing a secret. "Just make it quick. The contractor is scheduled. An eviction notice wrapped in the guise of a choice. The basement or the street. Serve or get out." My hand gripped the back of a nearby chair, my knuckles turning white. The solid wood was the only thing keeping me anchored as the floor tilted beneath my feet. I looked from my son's cowardly face, still hidden behind his phone, to his wife's triumphant smirk. A strange calm washed over me. The trembling in my hands stopped. The roaring in my ears faded to a dull hum. I felt a lifetime of being a good mother, a quiet wife, a helpful presence, all calcify into something hard and unyielding in my chest. I took a slow, steadying breath, met Tiffany's gaze directly, and opened my mouth to speak. You see, after Richard's funeral, the silence in our home was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. For 40 years, that house in Cleveland had been filled with the music of our life together. The scuff marks on the baseboards from when Mark was a boy learning to ride his tricycle through the hall, the faint, sweet scent of Richard's pipe tobacco that still clung to the velvet curtains in his study, the worn spot on the arm of his favorite recliner where his hand always rested. Every corner held a memory, and after he was gone, every memory was a ghost that whispered his name in the quiet moments. The grief was a physical presence, a cold weight that settled in the empty space beside me in bed each night. Mark started visiting every Sunday like clockwork. He'd arrive with a cardboard carrier holding 2 cups of coffee from that fancy place downtown with the green logo, one for him and one for me. He'd sit with me on the porch swing Richard had built with his own 2 hands the summer Mark was born. We'd sit there gently rocking, the chains creaking a familiar rhythm, and he would talk. He spoke of his worry, his voice a soft, concerned murmur. He'd point out the peeling paint on the window frames, mention the strain of me climbing the stairs every night. He talked about how lonely I must be, rattling around in all that space, a single car in a 2-car garage. "Mom," he said one crisp autumn afternoon, the scent of burning leaves in the air. He placed his hand over mine, his touch warm and firm. "You shouldn't be alone. It's not safe. What if you fell? Who would know? Come live with us. With me and Tiffany. You'll have your own beautiful space, no pressure, no worries. Just peace." Peace. That word was a life raft thrown to a drowning woman. The idea of not having to wake up to that crushing, echoing silence, of hearing footsteps in the house that weren't just my own, of being part of a family's daily rhythm again. It was a siren's song. He painted such a beautiful picture, a rockwall painting of domestic bliss. He told me they had a lovely guest room with an ensuite bathroom, that I could decorate it however I liked. He said I wouldn't have to lift a finger, that this was their chance to finally take care of me, after all the years I dedicated to taking care of him. Then, inevitably, the conversation turned to the house. "My house. It's just a lot of upkeep, Mom," he reasoned, his voice so gentle, so logical. "The property taxes keep going up, the roof will need replacing in a few years, and it's a seller's market right now. You could get an incredible price for it." He proposed a plan that sounded so sensible, so caring it felt foolish to question it. He said I should sell it. He explained that the money from the sale, which was essentially my entire life savings and the inheritance from Richard, would be more than enough for me to live on comfortably for the rest of my days without a single financial worry. "I can set up a trust fund for you," he'd said, looking me directly in the eye, his gaze so earnest it hurt. "A properly managed investment account. I'll handle it all. It'll generate interest, a nice little income for you every month for anything you want. It's so much safer than you having to deal with all that paperwork and the stress of managing a large portfolio. Just let me handle it, Mom. Please. Let me take this burden off your shoulders." A burden. He made my life, my home, my hard-won financial independence sound like a heavy, cumbersome burden. And fool that I was, a mother lost in a fog of grief and desperate for the peace he promised, I believed him. I didn't see a man eyeing a financial windfall. I saw my loving son, my only child, wanting to protect his widowed mother from the harsh realities of the world. So I did it. I called a realtor. I allowed strangers to walk through the sacred spaces of my life, opening my closet doors, judging the age of my appliances. I held an estate sale where people haggled over my wedding china and the rocking chair I'd nursed Mark in. I packed 40 years of my life into cardboard boxes, each one sealed with a piece of my heart. The day of the closing, my hand trembled so violently I could barely sign the papers. I handed over the keys to the only real home I had ever known, the place where I had loved and been loved. The check from the sale, for nearly $500,000, felt like a lead weight in my purse. I endorsed it right there at the lawyer's office and gave it to Mark, my heart swelling with a painful mix of profound sorrow and overwhelming gratitude. I was so grateful that my son loved me enough to take care of everything. I moved into his sprawling house in Ohio with just 2 suitcases and a single box of Richard's most precious things. The first week felt like a dream. Tiffany cooked my favorite meals. Mark took me out to see the local sights. They called me their honored guest and told me to make myself at home. I thought my new life, my peaceful life, had finally begun. I was wrong. It was just the beginning of the end. I had signed my own death warrant, not with a pen, but with my own naive, trusting mother's love. I had handed my son the keys to my home, my money, and my entire life. And I had no idea he was about to lock me in a prison of his own making. A prison built with the very bricks of the home I had just sold. The lovely guest room with an ensuite, somehow transformed into a small, cramped room at the back of the house. A space that had clearly been a home office or a sewing room in a past life. It was situated right next to the laundry room, and the ensuite was a small powder room down the hall. The single window looked out onto the neighbor's monotonous brick wall. It was furnished with a narrow twin bed that creaked with every move and a rickety, mismatched dresser that had clearly been an afterthought, salvaged from a garage sale. Still, I was determined to be grateful. I was with family. That's what I told myself every morning as the thundering spin cycle of the washing machine rattled me awake before the sun was even up. Old habits die hard, especially for a woman who has spent her life taking care of others. I've always been an early riser, so I started getting up before them, tiptoeing to the kitchen in the pre-dawn quiet to start the coffee. The first time Mark was so pleased. "Mom, you're the best. This smells amazing." Tiffany smiled and said it was a lovely treat. So I did it again the next day. And the day after that. Before a month had passed, it wasn't a treat. It was an expectation. If I ever slept in, even by 10 minutes, I'd come downstairs to find Tiffany impatiently tapping her foot by the empty coffee maker, a passive-aggressive sigh ready on her lips. Then it was breakfast. Just a little something, I thought at first. Toast and eggs. Then Mark mentioned how much he missed my blueberry pancakes. So I started making those on weekends. Then I started packing Mark's lunch for work, just like I used to when he was in high school, because he complained about the cost of buying lunch every day. Then I noticed the laundry baskets overflowing in the laundry room, so I started doing a few loads. I'd fold the warm towels and stack them in the linen closet. The scent of fabric softener, a familiar, domestic comfort. I started walking their high-energy golden retriever, Chester, because Tiffany said his shedding drove her crazy and Mark was always too tired after his long commute. I did the grocery shopping because Tiffany gave me a list and her credit card. I scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees. I cleaned the bathrooms until the porcelain gleamed. No one ever directly asked me to do these things. That was the most insidious part. Just happened. My days fell into a rigid, unspoken routine of silent, unpaid labor. I became a ghost in their house, a pair of disembodied hands that kept everything running smoothly in the background. The promised peace was the peace of being utterly invisible. I ate my meals alone at the kitchen counter after they had finished their dinner in front of the television, usually finishing whatever was left over so it wouldn't go to waste. The shift was so gradual, so subtle that I barely noticed it until it was complete. The honored guest was long gone. In her place was just Eleanor, the live-in help. They stopped including me in their evening plans. Movie nights were just for the two of them. The door to the family room closed. When their friends came over for dinner parties, I was expected to cook and serve the meal, refill wine glasses, and then quietly disappear back into my little room while they laughed and socialized. The real turning point, the moment the thick fog of my denial finally started to clear and I was forced to see the ugly truth, came one evening about a year into my stay. It was a Tuesday. I was sitting in the living room, a rare moment of quiet to myself, looking through my old wedding album. It was one of the few precious things I had that was truly mine. The leather cover was worn smooth at the edges, the pages yellowed with age. Seeing my and Richard's young, hopeful, smiling faces always brought me a bittersweet comfort, a connection to the woman I used to be. Tiffany walked into the room, a large glass of red wine in her hand. She was talking loudly on her phone, pacing back and forth across the plush carpet, complaining about a colleague at her marketing firm. She wasn't paying a bit of attention to her surroundings. I saw it happen in what felt like horrifying slow motion. Her hand, holding the wine glass, gestured wildly to emphasize a point. The dark red liquid arced through the air. It landed with a sickening splash right across a 2-page spread of Richard and me on our wedding day. My breath caught in my throat. I gasped, a small wounded sound. I grabbed a napkin from the end table, frantically trying to blot the stain, but it was too late. The cheap paper of the old album soaked up the wine like a sponge, a deep, ugly purple bloom that completely obscured Richard's smiling face. A single drop ran down the page like a tear. Tiffany finally ended her call, clicking her tongue in annoyance. She looked down at the mess, then at me, my hands trembling as I held the ruined page. There was no apology in her eyes. There was not a single flicker of remorse or empathy. She just sighed, that same impatient, condescending sigh I was coming to know so well. "Oh, honestly, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with annoyance as if I were the inconvenience. "You really should be more careful about leaving your things lying around where people can trip over them." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving me there with my ruined memory, the acrid smell of spilled wine, and the cold, hard truth. I just sat there, my hands shaking, staring at the purple stain that had blotted out my husband's face. And for the first time, I allowed myself to fully understand. This wasn't a family. This was a cage. And the door had just been locked and bolted from the outside. That incident with the photo album was like a switch being flipped in a dark room. Suddenly, I started seeing everything with a painful, blinding clarity. The little slights, the casual dismissals, the constant undercurrent of disrespect. They weren't accidental oversights. They were deliberate. It was a strategy, a slow, methodical campaign to make me smaller, quieter, more manageable, and more invisible. The isolation became their primary weapon. My best friend of 40 years, Carol, started calling me, her voice laced with a growing concern. After Richard passed, we had been each other's lifeline, talking on the phone every single day without fail. But now she could never seem to get through to me. The house phone would ring, and Tiffany would always get to it first, her voice a sickly sweet parody of pleasantness. "I called 3 times yesterday, Ellie," Carol would say when I finally managed to call her back from my cell phone, whispering in my room with the door closed. "Tiffany said you were taking a long nap." Or, "She said you had a splitting headache and didn't want to be disturbed." Or the most common one, "She said you were out running errands for her." I was never napping. I never had a headache. Tiffany was intercepting my calls, screening my life, methodically cutting me off from the one person outside those 4 walls who truly knew me and would recognize that something was terribly wrong. When I finally gathered the courage to confront her about it, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and indignation, she just smiled, that placid, infuriating smile. "Oh, Eleanor, you get so flustered over nothing. I'm just trying to protect your peace. You're at an age where you don't need all that stress and gossip." She was gaslighting me, twisting my reality, making me feel like I was the one who was unreasonable, the one who was causing problems by wanting to speak to my own friend. The control tightened in other, more insidious ways. Their house had one of those newfangled smart thermostats, controlled entirely by an app on their phones. My little room at the back of the house was always chilly, a damp cold that seemed to seep into my bones. When I asked Mark if he could please turn the heat up just a little, he'd always say, "Sure, Mom, no problem." But nothing would ever change. I'd find myself shivering under 3 blankets at night, my feet like blocks of ice. I later discovered, by overhearing a conversation, that Tiffany was overriding any changes Mark made, keeping the temperature in my zone of the house a constant, uncomfortable 65 degrees. She claimed it was better for the pipes back there. She started making cutting comments about my clothes, always disguised as helpful suggestions. "Is that what you're wearing to the grocery store?" she'd ask, looking my comfortable slacks and favorite cardigan up and down with open disdain. "It's just a little drab, don't you think? It doesn't really project the right image for our family." The following week, a bag of clothes appeared on my bed. They were from a discount store, all cheap, shapeless polyester dresses and blouses in shades of beige, gray, and taupe. The colors of invisibility. She wanted me to fade into the wallpaper. I tried one last desperate time to talk to Mark. I cornered him one evening as he was taking out the trash, the one time he was ever truly alone and away from Tiffany's watchful eyes. My voice shook as I told him how I felt. Not just sad, but isolated, controlled, and deeply disrespected. I told him about the phone calls with Carol, the freezing temperature in my room, the constant criticism that felt like 1,000 tiny paper cuts. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the overflowing trash can, his shoulders slumped in a familiar posture of defeat. "Mom," he sighed, and the profound weariness in his voice cut me deeper than any angry outburst could have. Can you please not complicate things? Can you just try to keep the peace? Tiffany. She's just trying to make everything run smoothly. She has a certain way of doing things, a high standard. She just wants what's best for our family. The words hung in the cold garage air between us. But am I not part of this family, Mark? I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. Don't my feelings matter? He finally looked at me, and his eyes were completely empty. There was no empathy there. No flash of the loving son I had raised. There was just exhaustion and a deep simmering annoyance. Of course you are, he said, the words a hollow, meaningless echo. Just try to get along with her, okay? For me. He turned and walked back into the warmth and light of the house, leaving me standing in the cold, dark garage with the cloying smell of garbage. That was it. That was the moment I knew I had truly lost him. He hadn't just been a passive bystander. He was an active accomplice. He had made his choice. He had chosen his wife's comfort over his mother's well-being, her peace over my sanity. He wasn't my protector. He was my warden's most trusted assistant. I was utterly and completely alone, trapped in a house with two people who were systematically, deliberately erasing me. I would go to my room at night and stare at the blank wall, feeling a profound, soul-deep loneliness that was even deeper and darker than the grief I'd felt after Richard died. At least then, I was grieving a man who had loved me with his entire being. Now I was being slowly destroyed by a son who couldn't even be bothered to look me in the eye. The cold in my room had nothing to do with the thermostat. It was seeping out of my own frozen heart. But the biggest shock, the final devastating blow that would shatter my world completely, was still waiting for me, hidden inside a thin, innocuous paper envelope. The mail usually went straight to Tiffany. It was part of her control ritual. She'd sort through it at the kitchen island, her long nails tapping impatiently as she created a small pile for bills and a large pile for the trash. My mail, which consisted of little more than junk flyers and the occasional note from a distant cousin, was usually tossed onto the end of the counter without comment, a clear signal of its insignificance. But one Tuesday afternoon something was different. A thin, official-looking envelope was mixed in with my pile. It had the logo of a major investment bank in the corner. I was surprised to see it. Mark had always been adamant that he would handle all the statements and correspondence, that I didn't need to worry my head about any of it. This one must have slipped through the cracks. My name and their address were printed neatly behind the plastic window. I noticed it had been forwarded from my old address in Cleveland. It must have been an official quarterly statement, the kind they were legally required to send to the primary account holder. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. A strange, cold sense of dread washed over me, a premonition that the contents of this envelope held a terrible truth. I tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan, my heart starting a low, nervous drumbeat against my ribs. I took it back to my room, closing the door softly behind me. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I sat on the edge of my creaky bed and slit the envelope open with a trembling finger. The paper inside was crisp and formal. It was covered in columns of numbers and dense financial jargon that swam before my eyes. But I didn't need to understand the details. My eyes scanned the page, frantically searching for one thing and one thing only. The account summary, the closing balance. I found it at the bottom right of the page, highlighted in a bold, black, unforgiving box. I stared. I blinked, sure that my aging eyes were deceiving me. I read it again, my finger tracing the numbers as if to confirm they were real. Couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. Typo. An accounting error. I closed my eyes tightly and opened them again, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that the numbers would change. They didn't. $782.15. $782.15. The air left my lungs in a single ragged whoosh. The paper fell from my numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. Nearly $500,000. My home. Richard's life's work. My entire inheritance. My security. My future. Gone. All that was left was less than $1,000, not even enough to cover a single month's rent for a decent apartment. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, sending me into a dizzying, nauseating freefall. I sat there for what felt like hours just staring at the wall, the statement lying face down on the cheap rug like a piece of filth. The silence in the house was deafening. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant drone of a neighbor's lawnmower outside. Normal sounds from a world that was no longer normal. My world had just been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I waited, my body cold and rigid with shock, until I heard Tiffany's SUV pull out of the driveway. She was going to her afternoon yoga class. I knew I had at least an hour. I bent down, my joints protesting, and picked up the bank statement. I walked out to the kitchen, the paper clutched in my hand so tightly my knuckles were white. Mark was at the table, scrolling through his phone, the exact same picture of nonchalance as that first fateful morning. I didn't say a word. I just walked over and laid the paper down on the table directly in his line of sight. I planted my index finger squarely on top of the bolded number. He looked down. For a moment his face was blank. Then I saw it. A flicker of something, pure animal panic, crossed his features before being quickly masked by that familiar look of weary annoyance. He sighed. That damn dismissive sigh. "Oh, that," he said, pushing the paper away with the back of his hand as if it were a piece of garbage. "I was going to talk to you about that." I just stared at him, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. All the grief, all the fear, all the humiliation of the past 2 years coalesced into a single sharp point of ice-cold rage. "Where is it, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, devoid of all emotion. "Where is my money?" He had the audacity to look offended, to act like I was the one being unreasonable. "I didn't steal it, Mom, if that's what you're implying. I borrowed it. It was for an investment." "A sure thing," the guy said. "The market took an unexpected downturn, that's all. It's not my fault." "You borrowed it?" The words were laced with a disbelief so profound it felt like I was speaking a foreign language. "You borrowed my entire life savings, my inheritance, without telling me?" "It was for us. For the family," he said, his voice rising, defensive. "Tiffany had some credit card debt to clear up from before we were married, a significant amount, and her car was on its last legs. And the contractor for the plumbing work went way over budget. It was for the house. Your home too." Then came the final soul-crushing twist of the knife. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but it was a manipulative, self-serving plea. "I did all of this for our future, Mom, so you would be safe here, so you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Money is just a number. What's important is that you're here with us, and you're secure." He had taken everything from me. My home, my memories, my financial independence, my dignity. And now he was trying to sell it back to me as an act of profound love and protection. He was telling me that my safety was dependent on my silence and my poverty. He wasn't just my son. He was my thief, my con man. And he thought he had gotten away with it. He thought I was too old, too weak, too broken to do anything about it. He had no idea of the roaring, all-consuming fire he had just ignited in the ashes of my heart. For 3 days I walked around in a state of suspended animation. The shock was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. I went through the motions of my servitude, making coffee, walking the dog, folding laundry, but my mind was a chaotic maelstrom of betrayal and white-hot fury. I felt utterly and completely powerless. What could I do? He was my son. How do you declare war on your own flesh and blood? I felt trapped, like a fly that has finally stopped struggling in the spider's web, just waiting for the inevitable. The spider, I now knew, was wearing my son's face. Then, on Saturday morning, salvation arrived in a beat-up, sticker-covered Honda Civic. My granddaughter, Chloe. Chloe was a junior in college, a brilliant pre-law student. She was fiercely intelligent and had a sense of justice that could level mountains. She possessed Richard's sharp, analytical mind and my stubborn, unyielding streak. She hadn't been able to visit much since I'd moved, and I now understood that Tiffany had actively discouraged it, always claiming it was not a good weekend, or that I was feeling under the weather. But this time Chloe had just shown up, unannounced, a wonderful surprise attack. The moment I opened the front door and saw her standing there on the porch, a worn backpack slung over her shoulder and a huge, genuine smile on her face, I felt a tiny crack appear in the icy despair that had encased my heart. I hugged her so tightly I thought my old bones might break, burying my face in her hair that smelled of fresh air and youthful optimism. Tiffany, of course, was less than thrilled. I saw her face curdle from a pleasant smile to a tight, plastic grimace when she saw Chloe standing in the foyer. "Chloe, what a surprise," she said, her voice taut with forced pleasantry. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," Chloe said, her own smile not faltering for a second as she looked Tiffany right in the eye. Spur of the moment. "I missed my grandma." The unspoken challenge hung in the air. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Over a strained lunch of store-bought sandwiches, Tiffany couldn't resist a passive-aggressive dig, a way of asserting her dominance. "We were just telling your grandmother about the exciting renovations we have planned for the upstairs," she said, directing her words to Chloe but sending a sharp, warning gaze at me. "We're finally going to turn her little room into a proper home gym for me. It will add so much value to the property." Chloe's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She slowly lowered it to her plate, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "Her room? Where is Grandma going to sleep?" "Oh, we have it all figured out," Tiffany chirped, oblivious to the gathering storm. "The basement is a complete blank canvas. It's going to be so cozy once we get it cleaned out." I watched Chloe's face. The cheerful, easygoing student was gone, replaced by a young woman with a thunderous expression that reminded me so much of her grandfather when he was truly angry. She didn't say another word about it. She just looked at me, a silent, urgent question in her eyes. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head, a plea for her to wait. Later that afternoon, when Tiffany and Mark went out to run errands, Chloe found me in my room, ostensibly helping me sort through some old books. She closed the door behind her and just stood there for a moment, her eyes taking in the small, cramped space. The single bed pushed against the wall, the rickety dresser, the window that faced a blank brick wall. Her expression hardened. "Grandma," she said, her voice soft but firm as steel, "tell me everything. And don't you dare leave a single detail out." And so I did. The dam of my silence, of my shame and fear, finally broke. Everything came pouring out in a torrent of whispered, tear-filled words. The endless, thankless chores, the systematic isolation, the constant criticism, the deliberate cruelty of the spilled wine on the album. And finally, the hardest part. The part that felt like swallowing glass to say out loud. I retrieved the bank statement from its hiding place and showed it to her. She took the paper from my shaking hands and read it. Her face went pale, then flushed with a deep, furious red I had never seen on her before. She sat down on the bed next to me, her young, strong hand covering my wrinkled, trembling ones. Her hand was steady. "Grandma," she said, her voice shaking with a controlled rage. "This is not okay. This is not just them being thoughtless or selfish. This is abuse. This is financial exploitation of the elderly. It is a crime. A felony in this state." The legal terms sounded so cold, so clinical, but they were a lifeline. They gave a name to the formless horror I was living. "They want to put you in the basement," she continued, her voice rising with sheer disbelief. "After they stole your money? The money from Grandpa's house? The home you raised their father in?" She turned and looked me straight in the eye, her gaze unwavering and fierce. "Listen to me. You are not exaggerating. You are not crazy. You are not a burden. They are thieves and abusers, and we are not going to let them get away with it. You still matter, Grandma. Do you hear me? You matter." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in 2 long years, they weren't tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of profound, cleansing relief. Someone saw me. Someone believed me. Someone was on my side. Her words were like a match, igniting a spark of defiance and self-worth that I thought had long been extinguished. She was right. I wasn't just Richard's widow or Mark's mother. I was Eleanor. And Eleanor was not going to spend her last years sleeping in a damp, mildewed basement. The woman who had faced down grief and loss and kept going was not going to be broken by these 2 petty, cruel tyrants. My granddaughter had just handed me a sword, and I knew with every fiber of my being that I was finally ready to fight back. Chloe left that Sunday evening, but she left a warrior in her place. Before she walked out the door, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Stay strong for just a little longer, Grandma. I'm on it. I'll make some calls tomorrow." The look in her eyes was one of grim determination. It told me everything I needed to know. The tide wasn't just turning. A tsunami was building. On Monday, a strange, almost supernatural calm settled over me. It was the calm of a decision made, of a path chosen. The path ahead was terrifying, uncharted territory, but for the first time in 2 years it was a path of my own choosing. I went about my chores as usual, my movements automatic, a perfect imitation of the docile woman I had been pretending to be. But inside, my mind was worrying, planning, strategizing. I was a spy in my own life, gathering intelligence before my escape. On Tuesday morning, Tiffany found me in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. She was all sweetness and light, a sure sign she wanted something. Her manipulative charm was as predictable as the sunrise. "Eleanor, darling," she began, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Mark and I were thinking. It's been so long since we had a proper family dinner. Just the three of us. It would mean the world to Mark. Would you be a dear and make your famous pot roast on Friday? The one he loves so much, with the roasted root vegetables." Her famous pot roast. The meal I had made for every single special occasion in Mark's life. His 16th birthday, his high school graduation, the day he got his first real job promotion. It was a meal steeped in love and memory and tradition. And now she wanted me to serve it up as a prelude to my banishment to the basement. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it nearly made me laugh out loud. A week ago, I would have meekly agreed, my heart sinking with the weight of the request. But the Eleanor who had spoken to Chloe, the Eleanor with a lawyer's phone number saved in her phone, was different. I turned from the counter and looked at Tiffany, and for the first time I didn't try to hide the coldness in my eyes. I let her see the steel that had replaced the sorrow. A flicker of surprise, of confusion crossed her face. "Of course," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I'd be happy to. I would make them their last supper." That afternoon, while the house was empty, I made the call. Chloe had emailed me the contact information for a lawyer in Columbus who specialized in elder law and financial abuse. His name was Mr. Davies. My hand trembled as I dialed the number. A kind but professional paralegal answered, and I explained my situation in brief, halting terms. She put me on hold. A minute later, a man's calm, reassuring voice came on the line. "Mrs. Miller, this is Arthur Davies. Your granddaughter Chloe told me to expect your call. Why don't you tell me what's been happening?" The consultation was free. I told him everything. My voice shook at first, then grew stronger and steadier with every word of injustice I spoke. I told him about the promise of peace, the sale of the house, the trust fund, the slow descent into servitude, and the final devastating discovery of the bank statement. He listened patiently, interrupting only to ask sharp, clarifying questions. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Miller," he said finally, and his voice was filled with a cold, professional anger that was immensely comforting. "What your son and his wife have done is not just morally reprehensible. It is, as your granddaughter suspected, a serious crime. You have an exceptionally strong case." Then I made my second call. I called my old friend Carol, the friend Tiffany had tried so hard to cut me off from. When she heard my voice, she burst into tears of relief. "Ellie, I've been so worried. Are you okay?" I told her everything too, the whole sordid story. She didn't hesitate for a single second. "Ellie, you get in your car and you drive here right now," she'd said, her voice fierce with 40 years of loyalty. "My guest room is always ready for you. You are not spending one more night in that house being treated like dirt." I didn't leave then. I had one last thing to do. I had to see this final grotesque play through to its end. But knowing I had a safe place to land, a real friend waiting for me, and a legal advocate ready to fight on my behalf, changed everything. That afternoon I quietly packed. Not everything. Just one small, discreet carry-on suitcase. I took my most important documents, my birth certificate, my social security card, my marriage license, Richard's death certificate. I took the small emergency cash fund I had always kept hidden away in a shoebox. I packed a few sensible blouses and a warm sweater. I packed my toothbrush and my heart medication. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a soft, clean dish towel, I placed Richard's old, worn leather watch. It hadn't worked in years, but it was a tangible piece of him, of the life we had built, the life they had tried to steal from me. I wasn't just packing clothes. I was packing my identity. I was reclaiming Eleanor. The suitcase was ready. The lawyer was on standby. My escape route was planned. All I needed now was the right moment to walk out the door and never ever look back. Sunday was a day of surreal, stretched-out calm before the inevitable storm. I moved through the house like a phantom, observing the details of my prison for the last time with a strange, detached clarity. I noticed the way the afternoon light hit the thick layer of dust on the mantelpiece, the smug, smiling faces of Mark and Tiffany in their ridiculously expensive wedding photo on the wall, the cloying scent of the lemon-scented cleaner I had used to scrub the floors on my hands and knees just yesterday. It all felt like a movie set, and I was just an actress waiting for the director to yell cut. They spent the morning in their sweatpants, spreading blueprints and glossy brochures out on the dining room table. They were planning their new home gym with the giddy excitement of children on Christmas morning. They debated the merits of a Peloton versus a Nordic track, and where the weight rack would go for optimal selfie lighting. They were designing their dream on the ashes of my dignity, and they were completely oblivious. They didn't speak to me, except for Tiffany to call out from the other room, "We'll start moving your things down to the basement after lunch, Eleanor. Don't wander off." I simply nodded, my face a perfect mask of compliance. After a lunch of leftover pot roast that they ate without comment, they settled onto the enormous sectional sofa in the family room to watch a football game. The volume was turned up to a deafening roar, the sounds of cheering crowds, shouting commentators, and blaring commercials filling the entire house. It was the perfect cover. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure they could hear it across the room. This is it, I told myself, my own voice a calm presence in the storm of my nerves. It's now or never. I went up to my room, my legs feeling strangely light. My hands were shaking, but my movements were precise and deliberate. I took out a single piece of plain white paper and my best pen, the one Richard had given me for our anniversary years ago. I thought about all the things I could write. A long, scathing letter full of rage and pain, listing every single one of their betrayals in excruciating detail. A sorrowful letter pleading with them, asking them why. But I knew it would be a complete waste of ink and emotion. They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't care. It would be like reading poetry to a brick wall. So I kept it simple, clean, brutally final. I wrote, "Mark and Tiffany, thank you for giving me two choices. I've decided to take the second one. Any further communication can go through my lawyer, Mr. Arthur Davies. His number is on file. Mom." I didn't sign it with love. The time for that was long, long past. I placed the note squarely in the middle of the perfectly made bed they expected me to sleep in for the last time. I slid the small, packed suitcase out from its hiding place behind the dresser. It felt surprisingly light, as if shedding the weight of their expectations had made my burdens easier to carry. I took one last look around the tiny, soulless room. My gaze fell on the single picture of Richard and me I had dared to display on the nightstand. I picked it up, the cool metal frame a comfort in my hand, slipped it gently into my handbag, and closed the door behind me without a sound. Walking down that hallway was the longest, most terrifying walk of my life. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet sounded like a gunshot in the quiet upstairs. I reached the top of the stairs, my hand gripping the cool, smooth wood of the banister. I could hear the television blaring from the family room below. They were still lost in the game, completely oblivious. I took the first step down, then the next. The small wheels of the suitcase bumped gently against my leg with each step, a tiny rhythmic sound of departure. The sound of those wheels on the polished hardwood floor seemed deafening to me. I was sure they would hear. I held my breath, listening, but the cacophony from the TV never wavered. I reached the bottom of the stairs. I was almost there. Just a few more feet across the foyer to the front door. The door to my freedom. As I passed the wide opening to the family room, I risked a single fleeting glance. They were still on the sofa, their faces bathed in the flickering blue light of the screen, completely engrossed in the game. A wave of something, not sadness but a profound and weary disgust, washed over me. They were so wrapped up in their own selfish, trivial little world, they didn't even notice their own mother walking out of their lives forever. My hand was on the heavy brass doorknob. It was cool and solid in my palm. I turned it slowly, carefully, praying it wouldn't make a sound. The latch clicked open with a soft, metallic snick. It was in that exact moment that the game must have gone to a commercial break. The sudden relative quiet in the house was jarring and absolute. "Eleanor." Tiffany's voice cut through the air, sharp, suspicious, and annoyed. I froze my back to her, my hand still on the knob. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I just pulled the door open. A sliver of bright, free afternoon sunlight sliced into the dim, stale air of the hallway. The fresh, cool autumn air hit my face like a benediction. I heard the sofa creak as they scrambled to their feet. Heavy footsteps approached quickly behind me. "Mom? What is this?" Mark's voice was laced with confusion. "What's with the suitcase?" I turned then slowly to face them. I stood framed in the open doorway, the bright world at my back, my small suitcase held firmly in my hand. They stood huddled together in the shadows of the hallway, their faces a comical mixture of confusion and dawning alarm. "I'm leaving," I said. My voice was calm. It was steady. Didn't even tremble. Mark took a stumbling step forward, his brow furrowed in genuine bewilderment. "You can't be serious," he stammered, looking from the suitcase to my face. Where would you even go?" A real, genuine, liberating smile spread across my face for the first time in 2 long years. It felt like stretching a muscle I had forgotten I had. I looked at my son, the boy I had loved more than life itself, and the woman who had helped him poison that love. "That's for me to know," I said, my voice clear and strong and ringing with a newfound power. "And for you to find out." And with that, I turned my back on them, stepped over the threshold into the sunshine, and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The solid final click of the lock was the most beautiful, most triumphant sound I had ever heard. I didn't run. I walked. And I didn't look back. Not even once.